The abandoned village on the arid plateau was finally showing signs of life. Arthur had successfully pulled enough water from a deep, hidden pocket to create a small, temporary watering hole in the center of the village. While it was intended for drinking, the demi-human children, foxfolk and rabbitfolk alike, had claimed it as their own, splashing and laughing in the shallow mud. Sora walked up to the edge of the hole, watching a young fox boy trip and belly flop into the muck. She glanced at Arthur, a playful glint in her silver eyes. "Your reservoir seems to be a hit, Arthur. Though I'm not sure drinking water is the term the children would use." Arthur chuckled, leaning against a nearby ruin. "It's a start, but I need something more permanent." He gestured toward a large, weathered boulder. "What do you think? If we carve a water script into a pillar, could it function as a fountain?" Sora blinked, leaning on her staff. "A script on stone? Arthur, that's not how magic works. Stone doesn't channel or hold mana like parchment. Even if you could carve it perfectly, the script wouldn't activate." "Let's test it," Arthur said, already moving. With a flick of his hand, he shaped the boulder into a thin, 5-foot-tall stone pillar. Sora, more out of curiosity than expectation, approached and carefully carved a water flow script into the surface with a small chisel. It was a precise, delicate piece of work. "Ready?" Arthur asked. "It won't take the mana," Sora warned, stepping back. "Don't force it, Arthur. If you push too hard, the script will just shatter." Arthur ignored the warning, pouring his mana into the stone. Initially, the pillar remained dull and inert, the mana seemingly sinking into the rock and vanishing. Arthur increased the flow, his brow furrowing as he pushed more power into the stubborn material. Suddenly, the pillar shrieked with a bright, blinding blue light. A geyser of water erupted from the top with the force of a pressurized turbine, spraying a high-velocity stream that threatened to tear the roofs off the nearest huts. "Arthur, stop. It's overloading," Sora shouted. Panic, for once, flashed in Arthur's eyes. He didn't try to dampen the flow. He simply vanished, taking the shrieking, erupting pillar with him. A moment later, he reappeared alone, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Wow," he exhaled, his heart hammering. "That was close." Sora stared at him, her mouth agape. You just made stone hold an active script. That's impossible." And the volume, it was enough to drown a legion. "It was a failure," Arthur muttered, disappointed. "The flow was way too high. I'll have to figure out a better way to throttle it." Days later, Arthur moved on to the next project, a road. To make life easier for the demi-humans, he decided to carve a wide, level path through the center of the village that would eventually connect to the distant river. He spent the afternoon carving the earth, creating a deep, wide, and perfectly straight ditch that bisected the village. It was meant to be the foundation for a proper stone-paved road. It was late in the afternoon when the rumble began. It started as a low vibration in the soles of their feet, growing into a deep, rhythmic thrum that echoed across the plains. "What is that?" Sora asked, looking toward the north. Arthur didn't answer. He vanished. Seconds later, he reappeared in the sky, hovering high above the village, his face pale with panic. He was moving at breakneck speed, carving a wide, deep trench into the earth as he flew, his hands moving like a blur. The source of the rumble became clear. He had teleported the fountain pillar to a high mountain pass directly above the river's source. By forcing so much mana into the script, he had essentially jump-started an ancient, massive mountain spring that would now flow for centuries. The water was now racing down the mountain, following the path of least resistance. Arthur was desperately trying to guide the deluge. He carved the ditch deeper and wider, his movements sloppy and frantic, trying to outrun the wall of water that was tearing through the plains. He dived toward the village, the roaring river right on his heels. He slammed into the ground at the village edge, finishing the final connection to his road ditch. The water hit the village with a roar, filling the deep, wide trench Arthur had carved. The road vanished, replaced by a deep, flowing river that cut the village in two. Arthur collapsed onto the bank, breathing hard. The fox children, however, were silent, staring at the sudden, vast waterway that had appeared in their backyard. "We have a river," one of the children whispered, stepping toward the edge and trailing their fingers in the crystal clear, rushing water. Arthur looked at Sora, defeated. It was supposed to be a road, he said quietly. Sora looked at the river, then back at Arthur. She realized he hadn't just made a mistake. He had just terraformed the landscape in a way no mage in history could fathom. She reached out, taking his hand, her expression unreadable. "It's a good river, Arthur." A week later, the need for shelter drove them to the northern woods. Arthur teleported to the edge of the forest and summoned his earth golems, constructs he shaped with perfect, efficient control, to clear a path and harvest timber. He left them to work while he returned to the village to help Sora organize their provisions. He had a vast array of supplies stored in his spatial storage that they were finally starting to unpack. When he returned to the woods the following afternoon, however, the air felt wrong. He walked into the clearing, expecting to find a fresh stack of lumber. Instead, he found the golems he had shaped from the soil smashed into piles of lifeless dirt. The trees they had been felling lay splintered, but not by natural causes. Arthur felt the cold, familiar pull of power deep in his chest, the temptation to simply erase whatever had interfered with his work. He clenched his fists, the earth beneath his feet trembling in sympathy. Not today, he forced himself to think. He was a man building a home, not a god building a monument. He had to stay grounded. Arthur returned to the village to tell Sora about the golems and the smashed trees. "Well, the woods are dangerous," she said, the fear evident in her eyes. "I'll help you set up more golems, and we can check it out in the morning together." To keep his mind off the encroaching threat, Arthur spent the rest of the day using his golems to systematically clear the dilapidated, mud and thatch huts to make room for new ones. He left a couple for the group and one for himself and Sora until they could build proper homes. Sora watched him work, her expression a mix of awe and worry. She hated seeing him push his power, fearing that he was slowly drifting away from her into a realm of detachment she couldn't follow. The next morning, they went to check the trees, only to find the new harvest smashed again. This time, they weren't alone. A dozen figures emerged from the dense foliage with unnerving grace. The males, tall and lithe, gripped ornate spears that hummed with latent mana, while the females stood back, their hands glowing with the distinct, cold light of high-tier magic. The leader, a female elf with eyes as sharp as flint, stepped forward. Her gaze swept over them, burning with 1,000 years of resentment. "First your kind begs us for aid. We teach you. And then you drive us to the woods to live with the beasts," she declared. "Now, after 1,000 years, you come to take our trees?" Sora, sensing the immediate threat, instinctively reached for her spatial ring. With a subtle flick of her wrist, her staff appeared in her grip, the wood humming with potential electricity. She held it ready, her eyes scanning the warriors in confusion. "We have no idea what you're talking about. We're just travelers." Arthur held up both hands, his palms open in a universal gesture of peace. "I didn't mean to steal from you," he pleaded, keeping his voice steady despite the magical pressure radiating from the warriors. "I left the kingdom of Eldoria. I don't agree with their stance, their politics, or how they treat anyone who isn't a human. I left because of that, but I do need wood. I'm just trying to build a home for some refugees." The tension remained thick enough to cut, the male warriors tightening their grips on their spears. Then a shift occurred in the back of the elf group. A younger female, looking barely 20, pushed past her elders. She hummed a pleasant melodic tune, stepping right up to Arthur. She leaned in, inhaling deeply near his neck. "Aw, don't be so mean, big sis," she chimed, her voice light and airy. She looked back at the older elf, her eyes sparkling with amusement. "He doesn't smell like them." She turned her gaze to Sora, her expression playful and slightly mischievous. "Can we keep him?" The air in the clearing, already sharp with tension, snapped. One of the male elves, his face twisted in disgust at the sight of their princess, fawning over a human, lunged forward. He tossed a small, folded parchment into the air. "Vine," he commanded, channeling his mana directly into the tome without a conduit. Vines erupted from the earth like jagged serpents, slamming into the ground between Arthur and the princess to force them apart. Sora reacted instantly. She pulled a lightning tome from her satchel, tossed it, and channeled mana through her staff. "Bolt!" she shouted. But the lightning was wild, crackling violently into the surrounding trees, and the barrier Arthur had silently erected around the entire group, including the elves. Arthur dropped the barrier the second the lightning subsided, but the elves were already past the point of diplomacy. 3 of the high mage females flicked fire tomes into the air, their hands glowing as 3 massive fireballs materialized, hurtling toward them. Arthur cast barrier. Sora screamed, bracing for the impact. Instead of shielding them, Arthur took a single step forward, raising his hand toward the roaring flames. Dissipate. The word was quiet, but the effect was absolute. The fireballs didn't explode. They unraveled, the complex magical instructions of the tomes dissolving into streams of raw, blue mana that drifted away like smoke until they vanished entirely. The elves froze. The leader stared at the spot where her spells had been, her face drained of color. What how? Something I've been working on, in case I had to fight the demon lord again, Arthur said, with an awkward, sheepish shrug. The leader's eyes widened, her posture shifting from aggression to intense wariness. You fought the demon lord and lived? She spun around, her voice echoing through the woods. Everyone hold. But the order came too late. A male warrior, driven by a desperate, misplaced sense of honor, was already midair, his sword arcing down toward Sora. Arthur didn't think, he moved. He warped, appearing directly in front of Sora. The blade came down with lethal force, but Arthur caught it mid-swing, his palm protected by a thin, shimmering layer of barrier magic. The moment his skin touched the steel, the warrior vanished. The remaining elves recoiled, their confidence shattered by the display of spatial manipulation. So, Arthur asked, looking genuinely curious, can you guys fly? The leader stared at him, her lips pressed into a thin, stern line. No. What about with using magic? Arthur added. No, she replied, her voice trembling slightly. Why would you ask us the impossible? Flight is not something magic can grant. Sora, standing behind Arthur, felt her heart race. She vividly remembered Arthur carving that trench while flying at breakneck speed, his body defying gravity with casual ease. She looked at him, her awe deepening. He didn't even realize that what he did was impossible. What did you do with my companion? The leader demanded, her voice wavering between anger and terror. A faint, high-pitched scream drifted down from the heavens. Every head in the clearing snapped upward. A dot in the sky grew rapidly larger, the whistle of wind intensifying, until thud, the missing elven warrior slammed into the forest floor, creating a small crater. Really sorry. I thought if anyone, you guys would have been able to fly, at least with magic. He reached out a hand toward the warrior, who was barely clinging to consciousness. Heal. A gentle, white light flowed from Arthur's palm, knitting bones and cauterizing wounds in seconds. As the elf sat up, blinking in confusion, Arthur looked towards the elven princess, who was still grinning at him with that same playful, predatory spark in her eyes. The elven leader pondered the situation, her eyes darting between Arthur and her own warriors. She had just witnessed a human perform feats that defied every law of magical study. Wordless casting, total absence of spell tomes, and an intuitive manipulation of energy that bypassed the need for any conduit. In front of her, the elven princess remained shamelessly attached to Arthur's arm, inhaling the scent of his skin as if he were some exotic, irresistible confection. How do we know he is not lying? One of the male warrior elves spat, his hand trembling as he gestured toward Arthur. Can you prove it? Show us your power. Arthur didn't even blink. He merely released a fraction of his pressure. In that instant, the bright afternoon sky vanished, replaced by an abyss of deep, pulsating black. Above them, a night sky erupted into existence, a vast, swirling display of star patterns that were entirely alien to this world. The elves, save for the leader, recoiled in primal terror, shielding their eyes from the cosmic spectacle. Arthur! Sora called out, her voice sharp with alarm. She was simultaneously trying to pry the princess off Arthur's arm. The girl was now drooping, practically drooling as she refused to relinquish her hold. Arthur snapped back to reality, stifling the aura instantly. The familiar blue daylight rushed back into the clearing. Fine, the elven leader said, her voice strained. though her eyes remained locked on Arthur with a mixture of fear and newfound respect. "Come back in a week. We will discuss this further then." She turned to her younger sister, who was still clinging to Arthur despite Sora's increasingly desperate efforts to pull her away. "Lorraine, come." "Ah, but he's mine." The princess pouted, sounding genuinely devastated. "No, he's mine," Sora retorted before she could catch herself. The moment the words left her lips, her face turned a brilliant shade of crimson. She froze, her breath hitching, and she instinctively stepped back, looking anywhere but at Arthur. Arthur simply stood there, looking bewildered as the elven party retreated into the dense forest shadows. "I don't trust her," Sora muttered, her voice regaining some of its defensive edge as she grabbed Arthur's hand. She didn't wait for a response. She squeezed his fingers, and with a familiar shimmer of displaced air, Arthur warped them both back to the village. Arthur and Sora sat on the bank of the newly carved river, the cool water rushing past their feet. The demi-human children were further downstream, their laughter echoing against the banks Arthur had inadvertently created. It was a scene of fragile peace, a stark contrast to the volatile encounter they'd just survived in the woods. "What are you going to do?" Sora asked, her gaze lingering on the northern tree line. Arthur watched the water, his brow furrowed. The elven leader's words, the accusations of betrayal and forgotten history, gnawed at him. "I'm not sure," he admitted, his voice quiet. "Their leader mentioned that they taught our kind magic once, and the humans drove them into the forest with the beasts in return. I've read the kingdom's history, Sora. There's nothing about that. It's like it was wiped clean." He turned to her, his expression sharpening with purpose. "If they know how magic truly works, they might know something that could help us. More importantly, help you." Sora softened at the mention of her own limitations, but her protective instinct remained fierce. She shifted, her hand brushing against the hilt of her dagger, her eyes narrowing as she recalled the princess's predatory behavior. "I agree we need answers," Sora said, her tone firm. "But Arthur, you heard her. They are isolationists who hate us for crimes we didn't even know were committed. And that princess—" She paused, her cheeks flushing with a flash of remembered irritation. "She's dangerous. She isn't just curious about your magic, she's obsessed. I don't trust her for a second, and you are not going to be alone with her. Not if I have anything to say about it." Arthur gave a small, weary smile, reaching out to squeeze her hand. "I wouldn't dream of it, Sora. I just want to understand. If we're going to build a home here, we can't afford to have enemies hiding in the trees who know more about our past than we do." He looked back at the river, the water sparkling in the late afternoon sun. "We have a week. We need to prepare, not for a fight, but for a conversation. If we're going back, we need to show them that not all humans are the ones who betrayed them." Sora nodded, though her grip on his hand tightened, her eyes still scanning the forest shadows. "Then we start by focusing on the village," she suggested, looking at the half-finished huts. "We have to be ready for them when they return. If those elves are going to be our neighbors, we need to make sure this place is something they can respect, not just a refugee camp, but something better." High within the canopy of the glowing forest, the atmosphere in the Chamber of Elders was far from serene. The structure, woven from living ember and infused with ancient magic, the air vibrated with the tension between the two sisters. Nimra shoved her younger sister back, though Lorraine clung to her with a grip that defied her petite frame. "Get off me, Lorraine," Nimra hissed, her eyes flashing with a cold, aristocratic annoyance. "No," Lori shot back, her voice stubborn. "I told you, call me Lori, and I'm not going anywhere. Why can't I stay? Why can't we just talk to him?" Nimra pinned her sister's shoulders, staring down at her. "Because you are not thinking straight. You've been obsessed with high-output casting since you were a child, burning through your reserves in seconds just for the sake of a spectacle. You see power, and you mistake it for wisdom." Lori didn't flinch. She was, by any account, a prodigy, perhaps the most talented magic wielder of their generation. Yet her affinity for massive, destructive spells had always been a point of contention. Her family constantly pushed her toward the safer, low-tier scripts, but Lori found them suffocatingly dull. To her, magic was meant to be grand, impactful, and alive. Then she had seen him, A human, of all things. Yet he had felt like a bottomless well of raw, unrefined potential. "I am thinking straight," Lori insisted, finally loosening her grip on Nimra's waist to pace the room, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hum. "Couldn't you smell him? He's different. He doesn't carry a conduit. He doesn't use a tome. And yet the air around him felt like it was bowing. I can sense it, Nimra. We should trust him. He's a battery that doesn't run dry." Nimra let out a long, weary sigh, rubbing her temples. She hated that her sister had a point. The human was different, and that difference was more terrifying than any threat the kingdom of Eldoria had ever posed. "Fine," Nimra finally conceded, her shoulders slumping. "I will bring it up to the elders when they arrive. But do not think this means I trust him. If he is as powerful as he seems, he is exactly the kind of anomaly the history books warn us about." Lori's face lit up, the frustration vanishing instantly. "Yay! Good call, big sis." With a triumphant hum, Lori turned on her heel and strode out of the chamber, her movements light and cheerful. She was already imagining the possibilities, not of war, but of discovery. For the first time in 1,000 years, the stagnant air of the Elven Enclave felt like it was finally beginning to move. If you enjoy these stories, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help this channel grow so I can continue to improve and provide a wide variety of stories. Thanks for watching.